I'm Liz Faubles, and this is Currents. Queen students honor Dr. King's dream.
We all know his famous speech, I Have a Dream. Some of you have been studying it in class and been talking about it. And it's meant for all people.
Plus, what the civil rights pioneer's legacy means for today's activists. And a former ambassador to the Vatican talks about politics as a vocation.
But a responsibility as part of our baptismal mission to be a transformative presence in the world, to care about setting the conditions under which we live and work and raise our children. And that's politics.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. The country yesterday honored the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Remembrances for the slain civil rights leader were held across the country, including at the memorial in Washington that honors him. In addition to the civil rights marches he led, King is best known for his I Have a Dream speech, which he delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial back in 1963. Ahead of yesterday's holiday, young people at one Queens school commemorated Dr. King's dream in a unique way. Students at Holy Redeemer Academy in Flushing dressed up for the career that they dream of having one day.
Be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Today is a day where students can make the connection between what they're learning about Dr. King and his famous speech, I Have a Dream, with their own lives. I'm sure that somewhere Dr. King is watching all this and knowing that it's in his name, and he's very proud and very pleased. We all know his famous speech, I Have a Dream. Some of you have been studying it in class and been talking about it. Right? And the most important part of his dream, and there's so many important parts, was the part for children. Okay, and here you are, all the children in our school, dressed in careers they hope to have someday, your dream.
Martin Luther King Day means that everybody gets to dress up what they want to be for their dream about what they want to be when they grow up.
Today, since I want to go to FIT in Manhattan, I'm going to be a manager of a fashion industry.
It's more than just a lesson, you know, and lessons are wonderful where you read the text, but it's taking it out of text and connecting it to the real world application and to self.
And why do you want to be an engineer?
Because how to design the computer and the iPad.
Oh.
For this age group, for preparing them for today, for the lesson that I did was just getting them to sort of understand that there's a whole world out there, realizing that even though they're going to become something, that regardless of what they choose, they're going to be connected to each other.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a prominent leader in the African American civil rights movement. He is best known for being an iconic figure in the advancement of civil rights, using nonviolent methods.
Well, it's a torch, kind of like a candle, but it doesn't just represent a candle, it represents your dream and how, no one can ever take it out, extinguish it.
The fact that he works so hard on the speech and everything that he did to get black and white people and all kinds of people together to live in one place where you don't have to be separated is just kind of amazing that he did that. It inspires most of us today. Although it still isn't like that, it inspires most of us today to work harder and harder just like he did.
Stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. The Republican presidential field is getting smaller. We'll have that story and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Liz Faubles. Coming up later, forget about the mudslinging. We'll get a different look at life in the political arena. But first, a look at the day's headlines. Well, on the day the country honored Martin Luther King Jr., two Republican presidential candidates spoke at a celebration to honor the legacy of the slain civil rights leader.
Don't just talk to me. Show me. Show me the power of Martin Luther King. Show me the power of what you believe in your heart. Reflect it every day in your values, the way you live your life, the way you talk, but more importantly, the way you walk.
I would just suggest to all of you that Dr. King would ask us today not just to look back and remember, but to look forward, to look to the young people who are here in this room, to look to the young people who aren't here in this room, to ask ourselves, to what degree can we give to them the same spirit of hope, the same idealism, the same belief in America, the same understanding that salvation comes through faith in God, and that together we can in fact create a dramatically better future for all Americans of every background.
And Gingrich told the crowd that the first bill he co-sponsored in Congress was the measure to have a holiday for King, a Georgia native. Gingrich represented Georgia in Congress. Yesterday's appearance came ahead of last night's Republican presidential debate. And there is one less candidate among the crowd of GOP hopefuls.
Today, I am suspending my campaign for the presidency. I believe it is now time for our party to unite around the candidate best equipped to defeat Barack Obama. Despite our differences and the space between us on some of the issues, I believe that candidate is Governor Mitt Romney.
That's former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman, who came in a distant third in last week's New Hampshire primaries, and only 1% of likely primary voters in South Carolina supported Huntsman, according to a poll from American Research Group. Meanwhile, reports out of India say a Sharia court there has convicted a Catholic missionary priest and Protestant of forcing people to convert to Christianity. The 80-year-old missionary is currently out on bail and has been asked to leave the country. He runs missionary schools in one district of India. He is accused of being an accomplice to the Protestant pastor in forcing Muslim youth to convert to Christianity. Both men deny the charges. From Iran, a Protestant pastor has reportedly turned down an offer to be freed from jail by returning to Islam. The pastor was originally arrested in 2009 and sentenced to die after being found guilty of rejecting Islam. His case was eventually referred to the head of the Iranian judiciary. It's believed his execution has been delayed to try and convince the man to return to Islam. Turning to Ireland, where a report shows that a vast majority of Irish people disagree with their country's decision to close its embassy to the Vatican. According to the Irish Examiner, more than 93% who contacted Ireland's foreign minister are critical of the decision. The closing was announced only months after the release of a report detailing widespread sexual abuse in the Irish church. Meanwhile, a priest in Germany has pled guilty to 280 counts of sexual abuse against 3 boys. The priest was arrested in July after one of the victims told his mother of the abuse. The victims were between age 9 and 15. A spokesman for the priest's diocese called the abuse a, quote, catastrophe for the victims and for the Catholic Church. The trial continues through February 2nd. Well, police in Belgium raided the offices of 3 bishops as part of investigations into abuse there. A spokesman says the church is cooperating with the investigation. A government official told the Associated Press that church officials may be charged. A report released in 2010 indicated close to 500 instances of abuse in the Belgian church, going back 50 years. Well, bishops in the Congo are condemning the most recent election results there. According to the BBC, the bishops say the November results, in which President Joseph Kabila was re-elected, was marred by, quote, treachery, lies, and error. International observers say the elections had widespread irregularities. In a statement, the Congolese bishops called on the country's electoral commission to correct the errors or resign. Turning now to the Vatican, where Pope Benedict met there with Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti. The 2 men had previously met at Rome's Leonardo da Vinci Airport just before Pope Benedict's trip to Benin last November. The Vatican says that at the weekend meeting, the Pope and the Prime Minister discussed a number of issues, including the social situation in Italy, the Church's role in the country. Meanwhile, there was a skirmish in St. Peter's Square over the weekend as Occupy protesters clashed with police. The crowd, which included protesters from Spain, France, and Italy, were reportedly unhappy with the Vatican's wealth. Police detained 3 people in the incident, including one person who climbed the Vatican's Christmas tree. And a bishop in Sicily says the Italian government should recognize same-sex union. The bishop says it is important for the state to recognize when people of the same sex are living together. He did say that such unions should not be referred to as marriage. And back in this country, a parish in Minnesota is praying for the safe return of two of their own. Reporter Holly Wagner has those details.
St. Pius X in White Bear Lake is a half a world away from the scene of a shipwreck, yet it is the one place where friends of Barb and Jerry Heil can feel a connection to the missing couple.
To lose someone or to miss somebody like this, it makes it hard.
As longtime parishioners, church was part of their daily routine.
They usually went to daily mass, so they're not there right now, you know, you miss them.
So it was only natural that this be the place for an ongoing vigil.
There's always somebody praying 24 hours a day around the clock, hoping that we're going to find them.
Their impact here spans decades, starting in the 1950s, organizing fundraisers and activities. The Hiles were a couple who never wanted credit for their work.
They always stayed in the back. Even as great as they were, they didn't want to be in the spotlight.
But a once-in-a-lifetime trip now has them front and center as two of the 29 still missing.
Now, not knowing is certainly the biggest thing in any of our lives.
It's also the one thing that gives everyone hope days after the ship ran aground.
It's just hard to think that maybe we won't find them.
And that story from Holly Wagner. Well, closer to home, a Catholic school in Queens is closing its doors. Administrators at Corpus Christi School in Woodside have announced the school will shut down at the end of the academic year in June. They say the closing comes because of rising debt and low enrollment. Well, stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. Coming up, are today's occupiers following in Dr. King's footsteps? Well, the Occupy Wall Street movement began with an email back in July, a series of meetings in New York's Tompkins Square Park, a few $1,000s, and absolutely no idea who would show up to protest financial and social inequality in New York and across the nation. Yet on September 17th, a couple of thousand people descended upon the Charging Bull at Bowling Green, and later, more still, made their way to Zuccotti Park to defend economic equality. Sister occupations appeared all over the country and the world, with many ending in arrests and scenes of police brutality. Sound familiar? Well, one journalist says the movement bears a striking resemblance to the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King's struggle for economic equality. He is Nathan Schneider, editor of the website Waging Nonviolence. Nathan joins us now to make his case. Nathan, welcome to Currents.
Thank you. It's great to be on the show.
Nathan, you witnessed the evolution of the group before, in your own words, anyone was even paying attention. Now, for those who did not quite grasp the concept of Occupy Wall Street, a very brief overview of the movement from your vantage point, please.
Well, on the one hand, this is, as you said, a movement about economic inequality and justice. On the other hand, I think it's a bold social experiment and an attempt to rethink what political life could even look like in a globalizing world.
Now, you compare the cause of Occupy Wall Street proponents with that of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., specifically the issue of social and economic inequality. Explain your reasoning.
Well, Martin Luther King is celebrated and especially is remembered on Martin Luther King Day for his work on racial injustice, and this was, of course, very, very central to his work and to his concerns. However, he saw in the course of that work that you couldn't really deal with issues of race without dealing with issues of the economy and economic injustice, as well as also the war and what he perceived as American imperialism abroad. And it was these latter concerns of his that were much more controversial, that tended to alienate him from the political elite, and which have often been whitewashed away when he's remembered and celebrated now.
Well, have you come across opponents who argue you cannot and probably should not associate a revolutionary leader and champion of the civil rights movements in the U.S., whose vision was actually very deeply rooted in religion, he was a man of God, with a group of young radical protesters speaking out against financial greed and corruption?
Well, I'm not sure where one would find the basis for that sort of claim. I mean, a difference that you seem to point to is religion, and religion has been a growing part of this movement. It was there from the beginning, but as it's evolved, especially after the encampments were removed, religious organizations have really, some of them have stepped forward and played a absolutely essential role in this movement. And I personally, in witnessing it, have seen lots of people who you might not think of ostensibly as being ordinary religious people, really trying to reach out to religious communities, trying to connect with them, trying to draw on spiritual traditions in order to articulate and maintain this very difficult movement.
Now, Nathan, this is not the first critical social movement that your website has likened to over Occupy Wall Street. Your colleague wrote about South Africa's United Democratic Front, which helped to end apartheid by empowering existing community-based organizations and developing leadership capacities of local leaders. Does Occupy Wall Street have what it takes to enact this kind of significant change, in your opinion?
Well, it's really hard to know, and if there's one thing that I've learned about this movement from the beginning, when I hardly thought it would amount to anything, it's don't make predictions. The best one can say is that this is very, very early. The anti-apartheid movement took decades, the civil rights movement took decades, and continues to go on in many people's eyes, and I think people are deluding themselves if they're expecting Occupy to bring about the kinds of changes it hopes for within a few weeks or a few months. If it's going to happen, it's going to take a long time.
Okay, then, and having said that, what's next for the Occupy Wall Street movement? You said as early as December that as the initial euphoria of the movement wore off, this, of course, following its displacement, that there was a spiritual crisis casting a bit of a pall over Occupy Wall Street. Is that still the case?
Well, interestingly, ever since the holidays, I've been really surprised by the high level of energy in the planning meetings. You don't so much see it in the news, but the direct action meeting for Occupy Wall Street, for instance, these meetings are just full of energy and passion and excitement. There are plans for a number of actions in the coming months, as well as new kinds of organization and a major day of action on May Day, May 1st. So there's a lot in store. People are really trying to figure out how they can make a productive contribution to this election season and help change the conversation even more than they already have.
And really quickly, Nathan, what's next for you? What should we be looking for?
Well, keep an eye out for my article in the February issue of Harper's Magazine, which talks about the planning meetings before Occupy Wall Street actually hit the ground. And a lot of the formative decisions were made there, and I tried to tell the story of what I saw in those meetings.
All right. Thank you so much, Nathan Schneider. He is editor of the website Waging Nonviolence. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, stay tuned. There is more currents ahead. When we return in the heat of the 2012 election, a different look at life in politics.
We're tempted to feel that our lives are governed by large impersonal forces over which we can't possibly have any control.
Finally tonight, politics is always at the center of public debate, especially over the last few years, as healthcare, jobs, and the economy have been on everyone's mind. But with the 2012 primary races underway, things appear to have headed into overdrive. And candidates lobbing accusations and insults back and forth, it's easy to be discouraged about becoming involved in the political process. Well, this past weekend, at an event called New York Encounter, attendees got a different understanding of what it means to enter the political arena. At the event, organized by the Catholic Movement Communion and Liberation and the Crossroads Cultural Center, a former U.S. ambassador to the Vatican shared some words of wisdom and experience.
I have to say, it makes me feel a little bit like poor Salieri coming on after Mozart with my prosaic topic, politics as a vocation.
Tonight we will have, as a keynote address, Professor Marianne Glendon. a person of faith, but a person definitely open, interested, curious toward the rest of the world. The topic she will discuss, politics as vocation, is a challenge in itself. This is precisely the kind of challenge that we want to, and proposal that we want to offer to everybody.
We all know that in politics, compromise is a necessity, and we all know that the ability to fashion compromise is an important political art. But it's also the case that it is difficult to discern where political compromise shades off into moral compromise and into material cooperation with evil.
I think the main reason people are turned off politics today is actually not so much because of the perception of corruption in the public sphere, but rather we feel, or we're tempted to feel, that our lives are governed by large impersonal forces over which we can't possibly have any control.
John Paul II said in his 1988 letter to the laity, "Charges of careerism, idolatry of power, egoism, and corruption, as well as the common opinion that participating in politics is an absolute moral danger, do not in the least justify either skepticism or an absence on the part of Christians in public life."
The message that the church has been trying to send with increasing insistence, especially since Vatican II, to us lay people, is that it's our responsibility, not just an option, but a responsibility as part of our baptismal mission to be a transformative presence in the world, to care about setting the conditions under which we live and work and raise our children. And that's politics.
For a lot of us who are interested in politics, it's very hard to believe that we could go into something like that and really come out okay, without having lost some sort of special moral quality. But the truth is that the more and more you hear people like this, it gives you confidence to really try something out like that.
It was really kind of human and personal. The stuff that she went through resonated with me, even though I've never seriously wanted to become a politician.
When you consider how much depends on doing that boring, risky, grubby work well, how much depends on getting it right, well, maybe it's not so preposterous after all to think of politics as a vocation.
I hope that they took away the message that John Paul II and others have been trying to get across to us lay people, that it's up to us to be a transformative presence in the world.
And that is all for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, he's a boy who came face to face with Jesus. We'll hear his story. Until then, be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net. You can also connect with us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. From all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you for watching and have a great night.